Okay, it's a slow build-up. I like that. But let's try it again. Are you ready for some climate science? So much better the second time around. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. Tonight's edition is Going to Extremes. Is it climate change or just bad weather? So, we've got a great lineup tonight for you. As always, my name is Sean McDonald, and I am a researcher and lecturer at the Program on the Environment at the University of Washington. We have a great lineup, as I said. Our first speaker will be Sarah Reagan. Let's give it up for Sarah. We'll move on to Joe Zagrodnik. Joe Zagrodnik, so much fun to say Joe's last name, Zagrodnik. Let's give it up for Joe, too. I'm a big fan of clapping, man. Okay, and then we'll move on to James Rufo Hill. James. And then finishing up the lineup is Brittany Bormacher over there in the corner. All right, so I'm not going to take up a lot of your time to start things off, but I do want to just make a couple things clear to you all. We want you to take action. That's what Cascadia Climate Action is all about. The first thing about taking action, the first thing we want you to do is we want you to ask questions. If you have any questions about any of the science that you hear about today, we want you to ask the questions about it. So the way that you're going to be asking questions primarily is through the note cards on your table. There's some little white cards spread around. If you hear anything throughout the presentations you want to ask a question about, please write your question down, and one of the Cascadia Climate Action volunteers will pick that up and pass that along. So please make sure that you write your questions down. And then also, I'll stress this later on, but I'll stress it now too, visit the Cascadia Climate Action website to learn more about all of the climate action going on in our area. There's lots of great tips and ideas for how you can take action to protect the climate. And certainly, before the night is done, I'm going to ask you all to go to one of the tables over here in the corner and talk to some of the fine folks tabling and find out things that you can do to protect the climate and to take action on behalf of the climate. So that's your mission for tonight. Please follow through. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our first speaker for this evening. Our first speaker is Sarah Reagan. Sarah is a PhD student in physical oceanography at the University of Washington. Her research is primarily focused on the role the ocean circulation plays in modulating the Earth's climate and its changes. She uses idealized climate model simulations to determine the fundamental physics that drive ocean circulation. She's a member of the UW Program on Climate Change Graduate Student Steering Committee, where she works on climate outreach to the community. What luck you're here tonight to talk about outreach. She wanted me to pass on that her favorite period is the interpermian, because of apparently the extinctions. And her favorite force is the Coriolis force. So that's something we should all know about Sarah. So without further ado, let's give it up for Sarah Reagan.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. So basically, I'm just here to give a little intro to the rest of the night. And I'm kind of aware that I'm sort of just preaching to the choir here because you probably all know about climate change. But let's talk about global warming and let's talk about the difference between climate and weather. So I feel like a lot of times we're talking to other people, probably no one in this room, but a lot of times we're talking to other people and they might say something like, what is up on this slide now, where this January we had a really cold January, and so sometimes people will say like, oh, it's so cold out, like there's no way that global climate change is happening. But the thing is that, yeah, so I don't know, should I read it? No, you can all read this, right? Okay, no? Oh, okay. So there's two people walking together, and one person says, oh, it's so cold out, so much for global warming, right? And the other person says, oh gosh, this used to happen all the time. And so then this, wow, sorry that the slides are so small. Basically, this plot in the top right is saying that there used to be a lot more really cold days than there are now. And then, so basically what used to feel normal now feels really cold. And then this bottom plot in the bottom right, our figure in the bottom right is really funny. It's like, wow, sorry, I don't know how to read the comic to you. But in the future, oh, look at this, there's ice here. So much for global warming, like one little patch of ice. So, okay, sorry though. Okay, it's really funny. So basically, yeah, so this is a little snapshot that I like to use to tell my grandma about what the difference between weather and climate are. I showed her this picture and she said, oh, thanks for explaining finally to me the difference. But weather and climate are two different things, right? Weather is what we're experiencing right now at this moment, or like small time chunks, whereas climate are the broader trends. So the way that my grandma thinks about it is what she'll wear on that very day, so that's weather, whereas what we have in our closets, that tells you about the climate in the region where you live. So I study the effects of the greenhouse effect on the ocean and the ocean back on the climate. But so I think we all kind of know what the greenhouse effect is probably, but as a reminder, so that you can talk to other people about it, why do we have the climate that we do? Right? It starts with, we get energy from the sun, and that energy from the sun is absorbed from the by the atmosphere and reflected off of the surface of the earth back into the atmosphere. And then the atmosphere relimits it, and it basically the amount that the atmosphere is able to absorb and re-emit is dependent on the stuff that's in the atmosphere. And when we put more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, it reabsorbs and re-emits more energy than at the level that we are now. So the Earth is warming. It's warmed about 1 degree Celsius since the Industrial Revolution, and we're doing that. We're putting the CO2 into the atmosphere. So this plot is showing difference in temperature from between each year on this plot and the average of the period of 1950 to 1980. And in general, you can see there's a lot of up and down. There's bumps and wiggles along this line, but we're trending upwards for sure. But if we look at atmospheric air temperatures, we're missing a large part of the story. So part of the reason why I like to study the ocean so much is that actually about over 90% of the excess energy that's coming into our climate system is going directly into the oceans. So that's what these circles on the left of my screen are showing, is that this excess energy, it's mostly pretty much all going into the ocean, and the ocean is actually keeping us from warming more than we have. This is a kind of mysterious. We don't really exactly know where this energy is stored in the ocean or how much it can hold, and it's really, really big and it can hold a lot of heat, but it's not infinite. Okay, so people like to say, you know, like, there's a whole lot of uncertainty, and that's a big buzzword, I feel like, uncertainty. So let's talk about uncertainty. There's two main kinds of uncertainty when you talk about projecting climate into the future. One is uncertainty in future emissions, so that's the different colors, the different emissions pathways that we're gonna be on in the future. And then the second one is uncertainty in climate response. So that's the shading, the like lighter colored shading around the darker colored bars. So I like to say there's uncertainty both in human nature and in Mother Nature's response. So this figure, I'm just showing that basically, like, okay, really quickly go through this for you guys. If you look at one certain location, there's a lot of uncertainty in the future. But so that's these plots here on the right for certain cities like Seattle. We don't necessarily know how warm it'll be in the future, but if we look at the world as a whole, so that's this plot down on the bottom on the right, we know in general we're warming, and we're going to warm about 2.5 degrees by the end of the century. And then, okay, I'm going to skip one slide and go to this one, but basically CO2 in the atmosphere stays in the atmosphere for a really long time. And it sticks around, so if we, stop emitting, let's follow this brown line on the bottom here. If we stop emitting and our CO2 emissions go down to 0, we're actually going to stabilize the amount of CO2 concentration that's in the atmosphere, right? So that's the purple line. We're going to flatten out. And then temperature takes a little bit longer to stabilize. So temperature will kind of stabilize along that same curve. So that's this red line here. But then there are certain repercussions that take a longer time to come into equilibrium. So sea level rise can happen because we're putting, when water heats up, it expands. So that can take centuries, millennia, so that's this solid blue line. And then sea level rise due to ice melting. Ice takes a long time to respond to temperature forcing, so that can take several millennia to actually stabilize. So that's this dotted blue line. So we can see the repercussions of climate change and the amount of CO2 and how much CO2 is in the atmosphere for a long time after we stop emitting. And then this is my last slide. Another comic that, do you need me to read this one too? Okay. Okay, so this is my favorite. This is got by the same guy, XKCD, and a great comic drawer. Okay, so this says, without prompt, aggressive limits on CO2 emissions, the Earth will likely warm by an average of 4 to 5 degrees centuries by the century. 4 to 5 degrees centigrade by century's end. And how big a change is that? So basically, we're here. It's 0 degrees different from what it is today, right? So look around outside you. This is what it looks like right now. If we if we decrease temperatures by 4 to 5 degrees, we were all under 900 feet of ice. There was like a huge ice sheet in this region. But if we warm by 4 degrees, we don't really know what that will look like, but clearly, 900 feet of ice is very different from what it is now, so probably it will look very different. Yeah, thanks for listening.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, so that's a great overview of the climate system and climate change. And it is interesting to think, you think 4 degrees is not that big of a deal on a daily basis, but if the average temperature did increase by 4 degrees, it would have huge repercussions. So now that we've learned a little bit about climate change and the difference between climate and weather, we're going to move on and talk a little bit more specifically about the link between extreme weather events and climate change. And our next speaker is Joe Zagrodnik. Joe received his PhD in Hi, Joe. He's sidling up next to me. It's Joe. All right. Joe received his PhD in atmospheric sciences from the University of Washington in March, so it's fresh. Fresh PhD. I thought he smelled fresh. He does smell fresh. His dissertation research focused on the enhancement of precipitation over the Olympic Mountains of Washington State. He also studied Pacific Northwest climatology and extreme weather events, which is great. He is the manager of the UW Weather Forecasting Team, which recently won the 2018-19 Collegiate Forecasting Competition National Championship. That's pretty nerdy, but cool.
We're proud of it.
Starting next month, though, he will be a postdoctoral researcher with the Washington State University Agricultural Weather Network. So that's pretty cool. The last thing I will say about Joe is that he's a local boy. He lives right around the corner, right? West Seattle. As of last year, local. Nice home field advantage. So let's give it up for Joe Zagrodnik.
Okay, so you saw the big picture, but I'm kind of an expert on local weather, so we're going to talk more specifically about extreme weather and climate change in Western Washington. And so just to get right into it, let's define what we mean by extreme events. And these are weather events that do not occur very often at a particular location. The key word being particular location. So snow in Alaska, if they get 6 inches of snow in Alaska, it's probably not a very big deal, but as we found out in February, getting that much snow in Seattle is a big problem. And another example, Florida, heavy rain in Florida, we don't get thunderstorms or heavy rainfall very often in Seattle, so that leads to the same amount of rain that is not a big deal in Florida would cause significant flooding in Washington. So in terms of how those extreme events relate to climate change, we know that climate is kind of the average temperature over a long period of time, and then weather is the day-to-day variability. So you have a curve basically of an average temperature, and then it's kind of this, in this example, it's a bell-shaped curve where the black line is the previous climate and then the orange line is the new climate. And we see that if we shift the whole curve to the right, we'll have less extremely cold weather and more extremely hot weather, assuming that, say, this line right here is some threshold like 90 degrees, which we would say is extremely hot around here. And that's not even accounting for the fact that this curve could change shape. If the curve became more broad or skewed to the right, then we could have even more extremely hot weather than what is pictured here. So have we seen any such changes? I know this is a little hard to see, but it's basically the local past 70 years of cold extremes at SeaTac Airport. where the plot is the number of days exceeding various thresholds of blue is below freezing, purple is below 25, and red is below 20 degrees. So we do see somewhat of a decrease in cold extremes over the past several decades, but it's not really all that much, besides the fact that the 1950s and 60s were very cold. But at least for now, we're still seeing some extreme cold in the winter. Warm extremes is a bit of a different story in summer. So the three colors are 85, 90, and 95 degrees. And as everyone who's been around here for the last few years knows, we've seen a ton of warm extremes in the summer. And last year was the most 85 plus degree days in the SeaTac record. Although, fortunately, we haven't seen much of an increase in 95 plus degree heat yet, so that's good for now. But there's no reason to think that these warm years won't continue, unfortunately. So I'll just go through this quickly, but basically we had a very cold month in February, right? February, there was 20-some inches of snow in Seattle. The temperature was below freezing for much of the month, and it set a number of cold records. However, what this plot shows is the average temperature over the entire winter, and it's a time series again over the past 70 years, and the last little point on here was this winter, and you see that because December and January were so warm, even that cold month got canceled out just in 3 months. It kind of was right along the average of recent decades, and you can of course see that there is a warming trend in winter around here over the past 70 years. And there's a number of things that go into this, year-to-year variability, natural changes in ocean currents, the urban heat island effect with just more buildings around SeaTac Airport. But it's my belief that a decent part of this warming trend is caused by climate change. You can do some fancy math and remove the natural cycles in the ocean, and you still end up with about 1 and 1.5 degree Fahrenheit warming trend. So if you have more, write a question if you want more details about those different aspects. And same for, this is annual snowfall in Seattle over the past 70 years. There's some record missing from the 90s, but even our 21 inches of snow this last winter, it was, I mean, it's the most that many people remember, but if we go back to the 50s and 60s, there were a couple of really crazy snow years with 60 to 70 inches of snow in a single year. And there's records from early settlers of Seattle talking about 6 or 7 feet. In the late 1880s, there was one example of that. So what we think is an extreme now is nothing compared with what was seen in the past. So what are climate models predicting? What are climate models predicting for Seattle? These plots are from the UW Climate Impacts Group, and I know they're really hard to see, but you can see that right now we're kind of around here. We've seen about 1 degree of warming, and these are the 2 different pathways. And with the red being if we don't continue business as usual, and the yellow being if we reduce emissions somewhat. For now, unfortunately, we're on the red pathway as a society, and even locally, Seattle is not meeting its emissions goals. So, but even if we did reduce emissions, we'd still expect to see some warming. So locally, it's likely to occur greatest in the summer, and the right one is precipitation, which is not expected to change much. It's still going to be wet in winter, in the future climate. Climate models predict less precipitation in summer, but it's already pretty dry in summer, so there's not much to lose there. But relating this to extreme events, same amount of precipitation with warmer temperatures means a decrease in snowpack. And this plot, also from the Climate Impacts Group, shows the different river basins and whether or not the winter precipitation is dominated by rain in green, mixed rain and snow in orange, and snow in purple. And historically, most of the river basins are mixed rain and snow or snow. By the 2040s, they kind of mostly move up one level, and by the 2080s, pretty much all of western Washington, besides the North Cascades, will be rain dominant. So this causes greater vulnerability to winter flooding and summer drought. And I took these pictures when I was collecting data for my dissertation, and we had a series of atmospheric river events in fall of 2015 in Olympic National Park that caused considerable flooding and damage because the snow level was above the entire mountain range, and about 25 inches of rain fell in the course of a week. So this log jam, you can't really see, but that's like old growth trees that were washed down slopes into the river. And the plot, which is for the Snohomish River, shows the annual cycle of stream flow. And in a mixed rain and snow regime, you have two peaks, one from winter precipitation, and then one in the summer from snowmelt. But you see, the stream flow never really gets that high. And we have a steady supply of water in the summer, which is kind of useful when it's not raining. But then if the basin becomes rain dominant, which is these orange and red curves, then you have a huge peak in the winter because that's when all the rain falls, and then you have very low stream flow in the summer. So that's kind of where we're headed under these scenarios. So that's all. Here, I'll just let you guys read the summary, and feel free to come ask questions afterwards. Thank you.
That was really informative. So we've learned about the difference between climate and weather, and we've learned about these extreme weather events and how they may propagate into the future. That is all a real downer, to be quite honest. It's a real downer. And so our next speaker is hopefully going to talk to us a little bit about what we are doing, what Seattle is doing to prepare and to adapt for this changing future. Our next speaker is James Rufo-Hill. He holds a BS in meteorology and worked in the private sector providing global site-specific weather forecast services. He moved to Seattle 13 years ago to study climate change adaptation and holds a Master's of Urban Planning from the University of Washington, specifically on sea level rise. James has been working on climate resilience at Seattle Public Utility for the past 10 years. His environmental ethic was formed while he was serving the Peace Corps in the Dominican Republic. He's the father of 3 daughters, and here's a fun fact. He gives his daughters a daily weather briefing in the morning, so they know how to prepare. So they don't need Alexa, they got James. All right, let's give it up for James Rufo-Hill.
Thank you. It's true, Alexa is starting to take over my duties, though.
Sorry,
yeah, that's good. So yeah, I would like to at least provide a little bit of optimism and share what we are doing at the City of Seattle, specifically at Seattle Public Utilities. You know, I do work across the city in all departments, but I am at Seattle Public Utilities. And to remind you, we are the department that provides you with clean drinking water, reliable drinking water. We provide drainage and wastewater services, so we remove that stormwater, and we also provide solid waste and recycling and composting services as well. I'm going to focus primarily on those services driven by the water sector. Thanks. This is the Cedar River watershed, Chester Morse Lake. That is 70% of you. Our bodies are made up of roughly 70% water, something like that. A large percentage of water. and most of our water comes from there. So you're looking at, that's you, right there. That is what the reservoir looks like when it is full, at the beginning of every summer, provided that we have snowpack, right? We're almost there. Reservoirs are in good shape. I'll get to that in a second right now, but this is ideally what it looks like. And at the end of every summer, this is what it looks like. We're not like California, where they have multiple years of storage. We have relatively small reservoirs, and we fill them up every winter and every spring, and then we draw them all the way down every summer, and we wait for those fall rains to return and fill them back up again. So it's a little bit of a high wire act every year, but we've done okay, but we're starting to get into trouble, and we saw that in 2015. We've seen that in a few other years. Here's a plot of snowpack. So right there, the green line in the middle is where we're supposed to be. Every April 1st, we peak at about 20, 25 inches of snowpack. That's equivalent in water. And I've highlighted a few years. 2019, where we are today, is in black. This is actually a week or two old. I've highlighted 2015, 2010, 2005. Those were some of our worst years that we've had on record. Now this series doesn't go too far back. There's some great research into whether or not we've seen a decline in recent years. We've certainly had some really bad years. 2015 was exceptionally bad. And climate modeling suggests that we will continue to see that. And what happened in 2015 is supposed to be a normal year by around 2070, sometime in the tail end of this century. So what are we doing about it? I guess before we get there, let me just also provide another snapshot. This is a graphic that we put out every week. Again, this is as of April 8th, so I couldn't get the latest one in there. Upper left is precipitation over the course of the year. The red line is where we are. Green is where we were last year. Blue is normal. This year, we caught up recently. We actually had a really bad landslide in our watershed. One of our penstocks in the river was wiped out by a landslide because we had 8 inches of rain last weekend. So rain is good this year. So we haven't had great snow. We had a good period there in February. All which is to say we're doing okay operationally. This is kind of the metrics that we use. We watch rainfall, we watch snow water equivalent, snowpack in the watersheds. Reservoir storage there in the lower left, we're actually up by the green. So we are now holding more water than normal. We're not worried about flooding right now. If we see something coming in the pipeline, we will start to get rid of water. That's one adaptation strategy that I want to just share right up front, is that in years like 2015, where we are seeing less and less snow, if we've got the rain, we're going to hold on to it. And we're going to hold on to it earlier than we usually do. We're going to keep that reservoir high. There's a risk there in flood management. The folks that live in the Cedar River watershed, the folks that live in the Snoqualmie, because we manage the Colt River as well. It's a high wire act because we have to get rid of that water if we do see a storm coming. But we're running out of snow, and we have been, and we expect to be running out of snow in the future. We're going to have to raise that water even up higher. So, just so you know, this year we're in pretty good shape. This is my favorite plot. As someone who works for the city, that I want to share with you our customers. In blue is consumption. All right, let me just start. 1930 to 2015, through 2016 actually. And on the y-axis on the right is consumption, million gallons per day. On the right is population. So population has been going up and up and up, and it really skyrocketed, as we know, in the last couple of years. But look at it. We are using roughly the same amount of water today that we did in maybe the late 1950s. So consumption of water decoupled from population growth sometime in the 1980s. Some of that's due to just behavior. Some of that's due to incentives and shower heads and toilets. Some of it's due to pride in brown lawns in the summer. Whatever it is, we are grateful because you, our customers, are helping us adapt already. This is a major tool that we have. We can ramp this up even more if we have to. We're not sure how to go about that. In 2015, we went into voluntary water shortage, and you all did a great job with that. It was a very hot summer. We used a little bit more water than normal, but we still stayed in very reasonable bounds. So good job, everybody. Like, this is like, thank you. I mean, to be honest, it's a little bit tricky because, see, public utilities, we get our revenue from water use, right? So those are declining revenues while population goes up. It's a little bit tricky as we try to pay for infrastructure that will allow us to adapt to climate change in the future. It's kind of a catch-22. So I talked about some changes, you know, in operations. We're raising those water levels up higher in the reservoir because we're running out of snow. That snow is that extra reservoir. Out there in the middle of Chester Morris Lake, those are some pumps that we put in a couple years ago. So now we're drawing down deeper into the lake. That's another operational adaptation that we're using. So we're raising water levels up higher. We're drawing from further down. Essentially, the front line, the first steps that we are taking in adaptation, both in water supply and in drainage and wastewater, has to do with operations. That's the lowest hanging fruit. You can just kind of adjust the way we do business and the way we operate, and it will help us. I want to move on to the other impacts, but again, it's not going to be easy because 2015 will be a normal year by 2070. We're going to have to look at how Everett uses Spada Lake. We're going to have to look at how Tacoma uses their well fields and maybe start to work together regionally to provide water. It's going to be challenging, and we can see it coming. We've done 3 rounds of assessments, climate assessments, and they all point to some real trouble in the future. All right, now I want to move on to here in the urban environment and rainfall. So this is my, I guess, second favorite image. This is the lava lamp of water vapor globally. These are atmospheric rivers here. So you're looking at water vapor that is being transported from the tropics into the mid-latitude regions. You can see these plumes pointed. At any given moment, there are plumes ejecting out of the tropics into mid-latitudes, and those plumes are called atmospheric rivers, also known as pineapple expresses. Here in the west coast of the U.S., we receive most of our precipitation from these events, and really when it comes down to it, our problems in the city here, when it comes to urban flooding, basically all come from these types of events. And this loop right here is December 2007. This was the single worst event on record in the city of Seattle. We had 4 inches in 24 hours, up to 7 inches in 72 hours. We've not seen that before here in the city. Even Joe had an image of I-5 underwater at that same event. It might look like this. Don't be afraid. That sign right there, that dead end sign, is really down here. This is on the Burke Gilman Trail in the University of Washington area. This occurred in the summer of 2015. So we had this terrible snow drought, and we were asking customers to conserve water. And at the same time, it was really hot, and we started seeing these downpours. There was the blob offshore that appeared to be fueling these extreme events. This was just a little, I think it was a little convergence zone that kind of lined up over the Ship Canal and dumped maybe a quarter of an inch in 30 minutes, which is actually pretty intense for Seattle. The problem was, that was a 100-year event, an annual exceedance probability of 1%, a 1% chance, 100-year event. The problem is, 2 weeks prior, we had the same event in the same location. That's not supposed to happen statistically. When this happened, we realized our stats might be broken and something might have changed. So we commissioned the study, and lo and behold, we had found out, with the caveat that our period record is only 40 years long, but we found out that extreme events were increasing by up to 25% over the past 15 years. Some of that is variability, and in fact, we haven't seen an extreme event in a couple of years. We're due. You know, much like with water supply, the first way that we are adapting to climate change and extreme events is through operational adjustments. So I think back to when I first moved to the city in 2006, and we had this really bad event, and there was a fatality in Madison Valley. It happened to follow a month in which 15 inches fell, Seattle's wettest month in history, November 2006, 15 inches of rain. A couple weeks later, we had this 100-year, 1-hour event come through. It flooded a neighborhood. I joined the city a couple months later. They said, you know, we kind of need a meteorologist here, so I jumped in. And the first thing we did was we found out, okay, wait a minute. We've got some thresholds here. 2 inches in 24 hours, the system starts to break. And so now, one of my tasks is to monitor the weather forecast and look for certain thresholds. If we get 2 inches in 24 hours, we send the crews out to known problem locations to clean out, make sure that we've done maintenance, we have priority routes, and so far it's worked pretty good. That's the first step in adaptation. We'll get to some other steps. First, I want to mention that it's not just about public safety and property damage, it's also about water quality. We are regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency and the Department of Ecology. We're only allowed to spill a certain amount of sewage into our water bodies every year. Thankfully, we're only permitted to do so much. We're trying to not do that, but it's getting really, really hard. More and more atmospheric rivers are coming at us, and those big storms, it doesn't even have to be a 100-year event. Those storms are spilling more and more sewage into our waterways. That is a big, big driver. But I do want to get back to Madison Valley. So what kinds of things are we doing? So there's gray infrastructure, there's green infrastructure, and there's even blue infrastructure. What you're seeing here is, I think, what might be considered the very first adaptation project in Seattle that has to do with extreme rainfall. This was a half a city block that was condemned in Madison Valley, took out all the houses and built this detention pond. It serves as a park. It filled up during testing. It actually hasn't filled up yet, so it just serves as a local park. We've done this in a couple other locations. We did it up at the 107th and Midvale. We've done it in a couple other locations. You might also be familiar with rain gardens and these bioswales that we're putting in. This is called green stormwater infrastructure. Green stormwater infrastructure was first designed to clean our water before it gets to the sound in the lakes, but it's actually now being used more and more to control flooding. It's very expensive. Along with this, we actually built a massive storage tank in the Arboretum and some larger pipes. Gray infrastructure is just upsizing. So we're building this big, big tunnel. You know, the boring machine that came out of the ground at Northgate when they were done with the light rail there, we turned it around, brought it over to Ballard, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but we're building a tunnel underneath the ship canal from Fremont to Ballard, and it is going to collect all the stormwater that runs off of Ballard down from Crown Hill all the way to the lake there, and we're going to hold it in a tank before we send it to King County for treatment. That's very, very expensive. Blue Streets, we just sent a delegation to the Netherlands to see what they're doing there. They're very innovative. They've had to deal with water for a long time. Perhaps some of our streets could be used as canals temporarily. That's what they're doing there. We're not ready to go there yet. I do want to quickly talk about a few other impacts. Heat. Joe showed those great statistics from CTAC. Heat's not something we've had to think about a lot here, but we are increasingly starting to think about it. It's impacting some communities that don't have access to cooling.
We're going to find out exactly. Water. We're going to see if there's certain parks, say, along the same time that is acting as a
one thing we're doing this year.
We're going to help use that information to help our customers get access to cooling, and we're also going to help, ideally, to prioritize investments in green stormwater infrastructure to further cool. I'm excited about that. We also have an informal betting pool over when the first 90-degree day this year will be. Feel free to jot that down and share it with me later. One more thing, not really going to mention single rise. I do just want to mention though,
given that we're here in West Seattle, sea level rise is a problem, and we're working on it. And that's another talk. But we're also watching windstorms and winter storms that coincide with high tides. Pictured above is from December 2012, December 17th, 2012 at 8 in the morning. Wind, exactly that, a 980
low pressure system passed over exactly during high tide, and we had I think it was like almost a 3-foot storm surge or something. It was the highest water level ever recorded in Seattle. So while it does not appear that windstorms and big storms are increasing, we got to be careful because sea level rise is coming up. It's kind of like with the hurricane problem. They might not be getting worse, but storm surge is increasing, so it's going to get worse no matter what. Just want you to know that we're watching that too, and we're doing a lot of work there. That'll be another talk. So I look forward to your questions, and thank you for your support. My pleasure.
We have just one more talk for you before we get to your questions. I do want to make sure that you all are aware that we are going to be taking questions. If you have questions for any of our panelists, please jot them down on the little white cards on your tables. We will be collecting those shortly as we start our Q&A. So please write down your questions, and when the time comes, wave them in the air, and our volunteers will come by and collect them. We do have one more speaker. Our last speaker is Brittany Hodemacher. She's a master's student at the University of Washington School of Marine and Environmental Affairs, who thinks that we should all be talking about climate change as much as we talk about the weather. She's eager to bring science and business together through corporate sustainability initiatives that improve quadruple bottom line performance and make it easier for consumers to reduce their environmental impact. But today, she's going to be talking to you about how to talk about climate change when you talk about the weather. Brittany's on Twitter, you should follow her there, and she also writes for the School of Marine and Environmental Affairs student blog called Currents, and you can follow her there as well. So let's give it up for Brittany Hodemacher.
Cool. Hi guys, can you hear me? I tend to talk quietly, as I learned when we were testing out this mic earlier. So, all right. So, like Sean said, tonight we're going to talk about putting small talk to work and how to engage local weathercasters in the climate change conversation. Because small talk is weird, right? I think it is, at least. Probably happened to you guys tonight. You walked in here and someone was like, oh, it's so nice out, or oh, it's so rainy yesterday. It happens all the time. And you know what? We actually engage in this really painful, boring small talk because we don't know what else to say. And you know, I think this is a really big missed opportunity to talk about climate change. I mean, here you have people handing you on a silver platter the opportunity to talk about science, and we just throw it away. And then we complain about it when people don't know the difference between weather and climate. Well, what if your local weathercasters gave you some content so you can spice up your small talk instead of just bemoaning the we're talking about? I think we got a solution. It involves getting local weathercasters involved in the climate change conversation. And you know what? This is already being put forth. A 2009 Climate Change in the American Mind survey found that local weathercasters are a trusted source of information. They've got great access to the public, and they're incredible science communicators. Sounds like the perfect SciComm recipe to me. Well, it's already happening, like I said. All these folks up here, I don't know if you can see their looks very well, but they're creating content to help TV weathercasters engage their communities in climate change education so that viewers can learn more about climate change and ultimately we can do something about it. So, weather newscasters, they hardly have any time to produce content, but all it takes is going to the Climate Matters website, picking out a graphic like this one, choosing your city, and boom, you got free climate change, easy communication, and visuals, reports, all this great stuff so that we can start talking about climate impacts instead of just the rain. So, I know you guys are probably wondering, is this such a good idea? Don't we talk about the weather because it's a neutral, offensive topic? Do we really want to bring climate change into the mix? And you'd be right to wonder about that, because the American Psychiatric Association has determined that climate change poses a threat to public health, including mental health. And other studies have found that climate change impacts like prolonged drought and flooding and other things that we've talked about tonight, they can lead to elevated levels of anxiety and depression. So of course, we have to consider what these impacts could be if we talk about climate change more. But I think the good thing about some of these programs is that it allows for this messaging to come from local weathercasters who can tailor the conversation to their respective communities. Because we know that climate change and its impacts aren't going to hit everyone the same. We're going to have frontline communities experiencing the impacts of climate change first, and they're going to be hit hardest. But again, local weathercasters can get messaging out about climate change, the impacts, and its solutions in a way that's sensitive to what their communities are facing. There are other issues too, of course. We have to consider if, this is going to be a little too political for the news, or, if we're going to confuse people even more about the difference between weather and climate if we put it on the news. But I think the benefits outweigh the cost. So, what does this mean for you guys? Well, the idea is that if weathercasters provide more information to viewers like you, that hopefully their content will infiltrate into our painful weather small talk. And hopefully, as a community, we can start having more engaging, productive conversations about climate change that ultimately leads to action. Because that's the goal here. That's why we're all here. We want to take some action. All right, so what can you do? You can tell your local weathercasters that you want to hear more about how climate change is going to impact your community. You can engage people in climate small talk instead of weather small talk, please. And talk about it in person and online. You can also create science communication materials that are available for the general public. Again, the Climate Matters stuff that I showed you guys tonight is free and easy to use, but you can always produce your own too. And remember that studies have shown the best way to change public perception about climate change is with repeated, clear messaging. So get talking and keep talking. Thank you.
Well, so that brings us to the end of our presentations, and now we're going to move right into our panel discussion. So I'm going to ask all of our panelists to pull their stools up here. We have another microphone, and I'm going to ask you all, if you filled out your comment card, if you have questions for any of our panelists, just hold them up in the air, and our volunteers will come by and grab them. Great. Thanks, guys. We have another microphone there, so we're going to go ahead and circulate these questions around. Thank you. Thank you. Fantastic. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and sort through some of these questions, but just to get us started, I was curious in looking at some of the materials. James, I'm going to give this question to you first. You had mentioned some of the stuff that you all are doing, thinking about heat islands and into the future, what that's going to look like, and pointing people towards parks. But at the same time, you're thinking about parks as refuges from heat. We have decreased funding for parks. So does Seattle Public Utilities have a plan for that moving forward? Are they pushing for more park infrastructure as well, or is it just taking advantage of what's already in existence?
So we are actively working with parks to the Department of Parks and Recreation to work with the land that they already have. As you might imagine, interdepartmental politics is not always easy to do that. To say, hey, we'd love to flood Cowan Park in the U District. Could we just flood it every couple weeks in the winter? You can imagine how that conversation goes. Or so that golf course, we'd love to plant some trees there to keep it cool or whatever. So there's some sensitivity there, but yes, we are talking to them, and particularly around landslides too. But with respect to heat, it's tricky. It's not something that the city has had to deal with a lot. You know, first we're trying to make sure that our crews are safe while they're out there trying to keep the city moving. But our customers and the residents, we want to make sure that they have equitable access to cooling and to parks and to water resources and to spray parks and even air conditioning if possible. So I think SBU is primarily at this point focused on where it can advocate for trees in the right of way, where it can advocate for more green stormwater infrastructure that connects to that, and then working with not just parks but with other city departments such as Department of Neighborhoods on community centers and so forth. So we're working together, but it's a little bit tricky being the water department, so to speak, when it comes to heat. But we've been working on climate change longer than I think most departments of the city because we are so dependent on the water cycle. So we're getting there. I do feel good about the direction that we're moving.
That's good. Actually, this is sort of a related question from the audience, and maybe Joe, you might be able to speak to this too, because I think you talked a little bit about heat islands. So please comment on the effects of Seattle's changing tree canopy on local weather, especially heat. Is there any need to change our building strategies moving forward in the protection of trees? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So that's not entirely my expertise, but there's no doubt that just based on trees, when the sun hits trees, it causes them to evaporate water and pull more water from the ground, which makes it cooler than when the sun hits pavement or the top of a black building or other things that absorb the sun's radiation. So increasing the tree canopy would definitely be a way to reduce the urban heat island effect and make a more natural landscape than that's more reminiscent of what our natural environment looks like. But I will caution that the number one source of greenhouse emissions in Seattle is transportation. So if we're planting trees at the expense of increasing density, and resulting in people having to live further from the city, it may not be accomplishing our goal of reducing the impacts of climate change in the long run.
Anything to add?
Good. That's good.
Great. Actually, a question for Brittany. You mentioned this idea of weathercasters, TV weathercasters, talking more about climate and climate change. Are there any weathercasters in our area that are doing that right now? And you mentioned contacting them to ask about doing more of that. But are there folks that are doing that now? And how would we reach these folks to suggest that they bring more climate change in?
Yeah, so there are actually 24 local meteorologists that are involved in the Climate Matters programming, and I'm actually not going to reveal their names so that you guys go and find them and engage with them. They're on Twitter. You can also reach out to our local stations. This is a great opportunity for outreach and for you to share what you want to hear from your science communicators around here. And I think that it's a program that's growing. There's actually 600 weathercasters around the country right now, the last time I checked, that are involved with the Climate Matters program. And again, it's also materials that you guys can use too. I mean, I see people, just anyone using them on Twitter or in presentations and stuff, and it's really easy to use. So yeah, check it out.
Great, thank you. And just as a reminder, folks, if you have additional questions, please go ahead and fill out the cards and just wave them in the air, and one of the volunteers will come by and pick them up. This is a question I think that probably would be something that Joe, you might mention, you might be able to answer, and actually James as well. It's actually comparing Seattle to other cities in our region, maybe other metropolitan areas. First of all, in terms of our weather patterns, in terms of the patterns you're seeing in hot days, cold days, precipitation, is that fairly consistent across our region? Thinking about Vancouver, Portland, maybe Spokane, but I don't know. That would be a question for you, and then I'm going to follow up with you, James, about other cities, other municipalities, big cities. Are they doing the same sorts of things to prepare for these changes? Can we learn things from other cities, or are we doing the best we can? Are we sort of at the forefront? So let's start with you, Joe.
So this even goes into a bit what Sarah was talking about with how the oceans absorb much of the additional energy that's been put into the climate system. So that's because the oceans have an incredible capacity for heat, and it also means that they warm a lot slower than the land masses and are less sensitive to extreme temperatures. So kind of bringing that back locally, the Puget Sound region and the Pacific Northwest in general has seen the least amount of warming out of anywhere in the United States. So the warming that we're seeing here, which obviously it's obvious to everyone, especially in the summer, that's less than what's being observed in especially the Arctic region in Alaska. That's where the warming has been especially extreme and seen in the decline in sea ice, as well as just unprecedented extreme warmth in Alaska. So in many ways we're fortunate here that we live close to bodies of water that act to dampen the effects of climate change at least a little bit. But also, as Sarah noted, we not really sure how the ocean is going to respond in the long term, and it's not infinite. It's not an infinite source, so it's a big source of uncertainty for us as well moving forward.
With respect to extreme precipitation and urban flooding and urban drainage, yes, I've shared a lot of stories with Everett, Tacoma, Bellevue, Redmond. I know in 2013, Everett had a couple of really bad summer events, extreme rainfall in the summer, and in one of their neighborhoods somewhere in the south side of Everett, they put in backflow preventers throughout an entire neighborhood and to prevent any flow from coming up into people's houses during extreme rain. And that was one strategy. They said, okay, just everyone gets it. And then they went through this whole policy process of adjusting their assumptions about rainfall. And so, yes, the local cities are experiencing the same increases in rainfall that we are. And we're looking at Vancouver, the city of Vancouver in BC, and the way that they're structured politically, where their engineering department is and streets are more, it's just a different structure that allows them to use streets differently. We're looking at the city of Portland, both Bureau of Environmental Services there and the water department. And I talk monthly with Portland, San Francisco, and New York City, and Tampa. And I mean, New York City is, I would say, the leader nationally. They've got a massive budget, and they're allowed to do some really cool stuff, and we're learning from them. They're partnering with Copenhagen. Globally, I would consider Copenhagen and Rotterdam and Amsterdam to be the leaders in rainfall. I'm not comfortable saying that we are a leader in necessarily action. I would say that Seattle might be in the forefront of modeling and understanding the science and uncertainty. We just need to go the extra step and start to create some policy. I think that's where we need to go next.
Thank you. All right, this question is for Sarah, actually. As somebody from UW Oceanography, I think it's right up your alley. You've talked a little bit about the changing climate and the fact that the ocean is absorbing a huge amount of this heat. But is this sort of absorption heat, is that affecting ocean current patterns? And if it is affecting ocean current patterns, does that then have feedbacks on the weather that we're experiencing around the world, but more specifically the weather we're experiencing here in the Northwest?
Yeah, this is a really great question. The ocean is vast. We haven't, until recently, really been able to observe it very well. I think there's some interesting science movies out there. So maybe people have seen like The Day After Tomorrow or something like that, where like the Gulf Stream totally shuts down and we're launched into a ice age. That's probably really, actually, I'm not going to even say probably. That's not going to happen. So only recently have we really gotten observing systems out there to be looking at the transport of heat due to ocean currents. And so we're looking at that now, and we just don't have enough data really to see how the increase of energy has been changing the way that the oceans have been moving around. And that's not to say that we don't think that they will change. We think that they will, because basically the way that the oceans are driven are A, through the winds at the surface, and B, through the temperature and the salinity in the water, and the differentials in different locations in different regions, and that kind of makes the oceans flow around. So if you're changing the amount of heat that's going into the ocean and where it's going, you're definitely going to be changing the currents, but it's really, really hard for us to say exactly, and this is not a satisfying answer, I know, but it's really hard to say how exactly they're going to change. This is changing. In the past, we would have to, put ships out there every decade, basically, and we would run these ship tracks and drop buoys overboard and take measurements, and that would take a really long time, and it was really sparse coverage. But now we have satellites, and we can look at ocean currents based on like sea surface height, and that's really, really cool science. And then we also have floats that are kind of just all around. They're like 4,000. They're called Argo floats, that are constantly profiling and sending data back to us in real time. So we're really getting a much better idea now of what our entire, like 70% plus of our planet's surface is doing, because the oceans are huge and they're really, really hard to observe. So we're trying, but yeah, so this was a very roundabout way for me to say that yes, the currents are gonna change. And there's some indication that the overturning circulation in the Atlantic, so like the Gulf Stream and sinking in the North Atlantic, that could possibly slow down, but not like we've seen in some sci-fi movies.
All right. And so I remember actually, James, when we've talked before, you've talked about other extreme rainfall events beyond the pineapple express, something more significant than that. Can you tell us a little bit more about those sorts of events?
The arc storm.
That's right, arc storm.
Joe's nodding.
Awesome.
Joe's nodding.
Maybe he has something to say about arc storm.
The 1,000-year atmospheric river storm. So a few years ago, there was a study put out by the USGS that looked at what happened in California in 1861, 1862. And it was essentially one of those plumes that I showed that stalled, not just for a couple days, but for many days, maybe a week plus. And it was essentially a 1,000-year event. Think Hurricane Harvey. What would Harvey look like here? Hurricane Harvey was a 1,000-year rainfall event. And we don't have 1,000 years record, but it was statistically a 1,000-year event, and in Harvey dumped in some places 50 inches of rain over the course of, I think, 5 days. We averaged 37 inches of rain here in Seattle, so they got more rain in a week than we see in a typical year here. So the question when that happened was, what would that look like here? So we looked at the arc storm event. We don't have very good statistics in the Northwest. We're waiting for what's called the Atlas 14. We're waiting for the regional study to come through. It's finally, the federal government is finally going to come through and evaluate our stats. But the bottom line is, a 1,000-year event, 24-hour rainfall in Seattle is like 8.5 inches, almost 9 inches of rain. If that happens, and we are actually looking into doing some basic modeling of that, what would that look like? I mean, you know, Longfellow Creek would fill right up and totally flood Newcore Steel. Madison Valley would fill right up. You know, because we're not built, because some of our hills are steep, that water would just fill right up and houses would go underwater. So we would actually look like Harvey, even though it would be just a tiny fraction of the rain. So yeah, we're you know, but then it would wash away pretty quickly. So it wouldn't stick around. We have different land use. There were some other things going on in Houston that are different here, but yeah. So you know, I'm not crazy about the whole atmospheric river name and whatnot, because we actually see impacts from not just those, but we see impacts from garden variety cold fronts, and we see impacts from thunderstorms and convergence zones, and you know, maybe even a little piece of the monsoon that comes up in the spring. But anyway, the arc storm, beware. It'll happen. I mean, it will happen. We will eventually get 8 inches of rain in 24 hours here, and just, you know, we're already starting to get ready for it. Joe, do you want to add?
Sounds like a made for TV movie,
Yeah.
The Arc Storm.
I'll say it. First of all, I think Arc Storm is a fantastic acronym. Just from a weather perspective, we're shielded by, as I think it's atmospheric river, and then the K is for 1,000. Yeah. This entire Central Valley of California filled with water in those years. But so locally, Seattle is fortunate that we have the Olympic Mountains, because they block us from receiving the full force of these type of storms. So to get really heavy rainfall in Seattle from an atmospheric river type storm, the orientation has to come up from the south so that it's not blocked by the Olympic Mountains. So whereas if it comes from the west, then we'll be shadowed. But if it comes from the south, then that's where Seattle would be vulnerable. And many of our recent 1 to 3+ inch rain days tend to come from that type of event.
Interesting. Well, we don't have time for many more questions, because I want to be respectful of this time. But since, Sarah, you're from oceanography, and Brittany, you're from the School of Marine and Environmental Affairs, we have an ocean-related question. Because I think we've all heard in the news lately a lot of talk about plastics in the ocean. They've received a lot of attention, and a lot of money is being thrown at the issue of trying to reduce ocean and plastic pollution. Is that really where money should be spent? If we need to be protecting the ocean, we need to be protecting the environment, should we be focusing on ocean plastic, or are there other things that we should be focusing on?
I have thoughts on this. Because a lot of people in my program are really interested in marine debris and marine plastic, but a lot of us are really in the same boat, that we think that we need to be focusing on reducing plastic at its source. We need to use less. I mean, it's really hard to get plastic out of the ocean. I mean, you've probably seen some of the failed attempts by ocean cleanups and those camps. But really where it starts is with all of you and reducing your plastic. And so I think Seattle is a great city. I mean, people are really conscious, I think, of their plastic use. You see everyone with their water bottle and you know, things like that. With making small changes, but I think there's a lot more we can do and a lot more pressure we can put on the, you know, retail giants that we consume from, to really consider their plastic packaging and a lot of other uses of plastic. So I would say that really focusing on reuse is where we need to be spending our time.
I would completely agree and echo. People maybe have heard about the recent ocean cleanup attempt with a 17, 18-year-old came up with the patent to clean the oceans, and they were going to send out this trawler and pick up all the plastic, and it didn't work at all. And people were really, really excited about it and threw money at it. And there were some scientists who actually peer-reviewed the plans for this and said, actually, you guys, this isn't going to work. And nobody listened. So I think I would completely echo what Brittany said. not putting not putting plastic in the ocean in the first place is probably, well, at least right now, is our only solution. And this is like really small microplastics that you can't really go out there and see necessarily. These are the ones that are really hard to clean up. And I think that the money that we should be spending should be on more observations so that we can actually know where the currents are going and how they're going to change. And I think that's what we should throw money at.
If we're going to be throwing money around. All right, great. Well, y'all, so at this point, I want to point out that we have gone over time already, and I appreciate everyone's patience in sticking around through all this. We have a lot of additional questions here that we haven't been able to get to. And so, my suggestion, first of all, my challenge to all of you is to talk directly to our panelists. They're going to stick around, and they're happy to answer any questions that you have. So let's give them a big round of applause. They're all fantastic. And I'll be very happy to continue answering questions from you. So if you have questions, talk to them one-on-one. I strongly encourage that. They'll stick around. But also, what we will do is we will take all of these questions and we will type them up and we'll get answers for you, and Mary will send that out with an email blast after this event with some additional things that we can all do perhaps to protect the climate and take action. But I do want to point out before we go too much farther that there are a couple of groups here that you can talk to as well. We've got the People for Climate Action, they're over there. This gentleman's there to tell you a little bit about what the People for Climate Action are doing and how you can take action with them. So please go and talk to them. I should also point out that their web address is there, and that QR code will take you to their web address as well. You want to snap a picture of it. That will help you as well. And then I also just want to give you one more plug for Cascadia Climate Action. We have a table over here in the corner, and Gabriella's over there to talk with you about the things, simple things you can do that can do just one thing to take action on behalf of the climate. She can point you in the right direction. If you go to Cascadia Climate Action's website, there's lots of tips and tricks and information to help you take action. The calendar there is essentially a one-stop shop for information about many different events that are happening in our area, about hearings, and about opportunities for comment, for many different projects that are ongoing. And so go there and learn about what the Cascadia Climate Action is doing and how you can take action on behalf of the climate. So please check them out as well. And then I want to give one plug for we have two events coming up very soon. The next formal climate science on tap is Climate Science Goes to Court, and that's at the Royal Room. And we'll have Andrea Rogers from Children's Trust there again, and we do essentially a repeat, telling us about the big climate challenge, the court case going on right now. So that'll be, I think, a really interesting conversation. Please join us for that. And I think that we have a Schooner series with graduate students coming up as well. Do you guys want to give us a little bit of information about that one?
That's May 16th, and we'll have more information for you soon, but the general topic will be scales of climate change. So we're looking at time and space scales, we're looking at scales of action, we're looking at scales of costs and who will shoulder those costs. So that one will be at Peddler Brewing at 7:30 p.m. on May 16th. And that one is a graduate student run and graduate student speaker event.
Yeah, so that's a great way to learn about some fresh science from graduate students. That'll be May 16th at Peddler's in North Seattle. And then we have the Climate Science Goes to Court May 21st down in South Seattle, the Royal Room. So check those out as well. And then I just want to say thank you. It's getting very dim. Hopefully it's getting dim for everyone and not just me. I just want to, once again, just a big thank you to our panelists. Thank you guys so much. Let's give one more round of applause. Thank you so much. These guys are awesome. And like I said, we're happy to answer your questions. Big round of applause for the Cascadia Climate Action volunteers for putting on these events and coming out and helping us out. This is fantastic. And lastly, the Beverage Place Pub staff for giving us this space And so from all of us at Cascade Climate Action and the Program on the Environment, I just want to say thank you once again. Have a great evening, and please get your questions answered. Thank you.